John Wayne was the ultimate symbol of rugged American masculinity, a Hollywood legend who defined the Western and war film genres. His towering presence on screen made him a hero to millions, with many viewing him as the embodiment of courage, grit, and patriotism. But behind the silver screen, a lingering controversy followed Wayne for decades, right up until his death. While many of his contemporaries went off to fight in World War II, he stayed in Hollywood. Was it duty to his craft, or did the Duke dodge the draft? The truth may not be what you expect. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, changed everything. Overnight, the United States went from supplying its allies to being fully engaged in the Second World War. The devastating surprise assault on the Pacific Fleet left more than 2,400 Americans dead and ignited a nationwide call to arms. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed the nation with resolute determination, saying, "No matter how long it may take for us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory." Before the attack, America had remained officially neutral, though it had been supporting the Allied war effort through its Lend-Lease program, sending crucial supplies to Great Britain and other nations resisting Axis aggression. But Pearl Harbor shattered any illusions of staying out of the fight. Within days, the U.S. declared war on Japan, and soon after, Germany and Italy declared war back, forcing America into a two-front conflict that would define the next 4 years. Millions of American men rushed to enlist, eager to serve their country in its time of need. Hollywood's biggest stars were no exception. Clark Gable, Gene Autry, Jimmy Stewart, and Henry Fonda were among those who traded the glitz of the silver screen for military uniforms. Ronald Reagan, who'd recently gotten what would become his breakthrough role as Drake McHugh in King's Row, was also called to serve, having enlisted in the U.S. Army Reserve in 1937. While never sent overseas, he was stationed across the U.S., and by the end of World War II, had produced over 400 training movies for the military. But one towering name was noticeably absent from the enlistment rolls: John Wayne. And that's where the debate begins. By the time the U.S. had entered World War II, John Wayne's star was on the rise. He'd just broken into the big leagues with the 1939 classic Stagecoach, and after years of bit parts and B-movies, was finally enjoying his well-earned success. But his time in the spotlight had barely begun when the nation called its men to war. Unlike many of his Hollywood peers, Wayne didn't enlist. Initially, he was exempt from service under a 3A draft deferment, which was granted to men with dependents. He was 34 years old and had a wife and 4 children to support. But as other actors, like Jimmy Stewart and Henry Fonda, volunteered despite their own successful careers, the absence of the Duke in uniform became harder to ignore. John Wayne defended his decision, arguing that he could serve the country best by making films that inspired and uplifted troops. And, in many ways, he wasn't wrong. His larger-than-life portrayals of rugged heroes in wartime dramas and westerns undoubtedly boosted morale. But was it patriotism or pragmatism that kept him in Hollywood? Despite his insistence that he was best serving the war effort in Hollywood, Wayne occasionally offered some questionable excuses when confronted about why he never enlisted. At one point, he claimed he'd intended to sign up, but had left important paperwork at home, only to be blocked from retrieving it by his recently separated wife. In another instance, he blamed a missed enlistment deadline on his inability to find a typewriter to fill out the necessary forms. Whether these explanations were genuine mishaps or convenient justifications, they did little to quiet the controversy surrounding his absence from the front lines. Meanwhile, Wayne's Hollywood persona was taking on a life of its own. He became the ultimate on-screen war hero, playing fearless soldiers and tough-as-nails commanders in films that cemented his image as the embodiment of American patriotism. But behind the scenes, the question of his wartime service, or lack thereof, continued to weigh on him. While he'd go on to become one of America's most revered actors, his failure to serve in World War II remained a sore spot for the rest of his life, a regret that reportedly haunted him until his final days. For many of John Wayne's critics, his failure to enlist wasn't about exemptions or paperwork. It was about the lifestyle he was living at the time. And looking at the Duke's world in the early 1940s, it's easy to see why some believed he simply didn't want to give it up. By 1941, after separating from his wife, Wayne had become entangled in a passionate affair with a stunning Latin actress, all while enjoying a level of adoration that few Hollywood stars had ever experienced. Women idolized him, and many were willing to go to great lengths just to be in his presence. But it wasn't just the fame and romance that critics pointed to. Wayne was also living a life of adventure, hunting, fishing, riding, yachting, and indulging in extravagant trips south of the border, where his notorious escapades in Mexico became the stuff of legend. He was known to drink heavily, surround himself with beautiful women, and immerse himself in a world far removed from the sacrifices being made by the men overseas. On top of that, Wayne wasn't just an actor. He was a businessman. He had major financial stakes in multiple ventures, including a motel, a beach club, a country club, apartment buildings, and even oil wells. With so much tying him to Hollywood, was it any surprise that he stayed? As the war dragged on and the U.S. military faced manpower shortages, John Wayne was eventually reclassified as 1A, meaning he was now eligible for the draft. But this time, it wasn't Wayne himself who kept him out of uniform. It was his studio. Republic Studios had built much of its success around Wayne. Unlike the major studios that had multiple stars to fall back on, Republic had only one true A-lister, and they weren't about to lose him. The studio lobbied hard to keep Wayne in Hollywood, even petitioning for his exemption on the grounds that his films were in support of national interest. Despite this, Wayne was reclassified as 1A again later in the war, and once more, Republic intervened, securing a 2A classification, which deferred him due to his essential role in the film industry. Wayne later claimed that studio head Herbert Yates threatened to sue him if he broke his contract to enlist. But critics argue that he could have easily joined the military if he'd truly wanted to. No Hollywood studio had ever followed through on legal action against actors who left to serve. Some even speculate that it was Wayne himself who quietly encouraged Republic's efforts, using the studio's objections as a convenient way to avoid military service without shouldering all the blame. It's easy to assume John Wayne simply chose wealth and stardom over the hardship of military service. But there are several accounts suggesting that he did, at least at some points, consider enlisting. One of the most intriguing involves the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA. According to some sources, Wayne applied to join and was selected for the Elite Field Photographic Unit, a group that worked closely with combat forces to document the war effort. However, due to a bizarre twist of fate, his acceptance letter, signed by OSS founder William J. Wild Bill Donovan, was mistakenly sent to his estranged wife, who allegedly never passed it along. Whether she deliberately withheld it or simply overlooked it remains a mystery. Wayne also confided in his close friend and legendary director, John Ford, about his desire to serve. He even once wrote to Ford, who was commanding a Navy photography unit, expressing interest in joining. But when the opportunity arose, he found a reason to delay, citing unfinished film commitments. Was it bad luck, bad timing, or hesitation disguised as duty? Regardless of what ultimately kept John Wayne from enlisting, his absence from the war came at a cost. For the rest of his life, he carried the weight of being labeled a draft dodger. And it wasn't just distant critics who took issue with him. Some of his closest friends, including John Ford, never let him forget it. During the filming of They Were Expendable, Wayne found himself on the receiving end of a public humiliation. As he saluted in a scene, Ford couldn't resist taking a jab. With a sharp, sarcastic tone, he quipped, "Duke, can't you manage a salute that at least looks as though you've been in the service?" The sting of the remark was immediate. Red-faced and furious, Wayne stormed off the set, and it was only through the intervention of his co-star, Robert Montgomery, that the jabs stopped. It wasn't just Ford who challenged him. Many veterans, including those in Hollywood, resented Wayne for staying behind while others fought. Wayne's absence from the war had become a defining and controversial chapter in his life, one that left a mark on his legacy, despite his efforts to portray the ultimate American hero on screen. Perhaps it was guilt, or maybe an effort to reshape his legacy, but in the later decades of his life, John Wayne became one of the most outspoken patriots in America. He took a hardline stance on military service, openly criticizing those who avoided the draft during the Vietnam War. His intense nationalism and unwavering support for the armed forces seemed, in many ways, like an attempt to prove his own dedication to the country he once chose not to fight for. Since Wayne's passing in 1979, the debate over his World War II absence has never truly faded. Was he simply a victim of circumstance, kept out of the fight by Hollywood and family obligations? Or was he a draft-dodging hypocrite who capitalized on the war without ever stepping onto the battlefield? The truth, like so much of his larger-than-life persona, remains clouded in legend. What do you think? Was Wayne justified in staying behind, or did he fail to live up to the heroism he portrayed on screen? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into military history.